The Nautilus Institute in San Francisco and in Melbourne, and it's my honor to moderate this session at Jeju Forum. And I'd also like to thank the Global Asia staff for assisting in setting up this panel. The theme of this panel is a nuclear-free East Asia possible? Opportunities and constraints. The question of nuclear abolition raised so clearly by President Obama at Prague a couple of years ago is in fact an incredibly complicated global problem. There are different aspects to the problem: terrorism, new nuclear weapon states, the existing arsenals, the breakdown of the global non-proliferation and disarmament, some would say, regime. And on the solution side, there are, in a sense, competing or cross-cutting solutions on the issue of no exit from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, devaluing nuclear weapons, securing fissile material, stopping the transfer of nuclear-related technology, resolving conflicts, and dealing with the nuclear weapon states that are outside the Non-Proliferation Treaty regime altogether, including the one not very far north from Jeju Island. So it's a very complicated problem, and the question of abolition implies that all these problems eventually can be resolved to some degree or an adequate degree to actually abolish nuclear weapons. So the question we're asking here is, can you really imagine living in a world in which nuclear weapons have actually been abolished? Do you really worry about the threat of nuclear war these days? Or has in fact the threat already receded so that most days you don't really even think about it? We're very blessed to have some incredibly well-experienced speakers today to discuss the realism and idealism of the proposals to make Northeast Asia nuclear-free. Roughly, we have 200 years of deep experience in security and diplomacy and international affairs in this region in the person of the five panelists. And not only are they all distinguished in their public service, but they're all leading intellectuals in this field, global voices, and we're very glad to have them here, who is a Deputy Minister for Multilateral and Global Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade at the moment. He has a long career diplomat background, and his main, perhaps, claim to fame right now is that he is the Sherpa, as they put it, for the Global Nuclear Security Summit in 2012. He has a very big job. So thank you for joining us. Next, I'd like to introduce General Pan Zhenqian from China. He is Senior Advisor to the China Reform Forum. He's an advisor to a number of universities and foundations that work on international affairs. I first met him in 1994. I think it was in Seoul. I'm not quite sure where it was, but it was it was Hiroshima, actually, a Pugwash event. And I discovered the depth of his knowledge was unparalleled on these issues due to his role in the National Defense University and the National Institute of Defense Studies of the PLA in China. We're very grateful that you're here, General. Third, I'd like to introduce Ambassador Abe Nobuyasu. Professor Abe is currently the director of the Center for the Promotion of Disarmament and Non-Proliferation of the Japan Institute of International Affairs in Tokyo. He served as the Undersecretary General for Disarmament Affairs from 2003 to 2006. He was ambassador to the IAEA and many other international organizations, and we're very grateful you could join us today, Ambassador. Fourthly, we have Gareth Evans. Professor Evans, excuse me, that's my Australian coming through. Professor Evans is currently the Chancellor of the Australian National University and is President Emeritus of the International Crisis Group in Brussels, which he built up from year 2000 to 2009 to be a global force on the issues of concern to the crisis group. He was Australia's foreign minister from 1988 to 96, was a leader of the government in the Senate, and he instigated two very important commissions of investigation into the future of nuclear weapons. The first was the so-called Canberra Commission, and more recently the International Commission on Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. So thank you for joining us. And finally, our fifth speaker is Professor Choi Kung, who is Director General for American Studies at the Institute of Foreign Affairs and National Security with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And before that, he worked for many years at the Korean Institute for Defense Analyses, KAIDA, in Seoul. So I'd like you to welcome him to this beautiful island. We're going to begin with some short remarks by each speaker. And then we will spend considerable time on questions going backwards and forwards with the speakers. So let's begin, please, with Ambassador Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. This is my distinct honor and privilege to be a part of this discussion. And the nuclear issue is a very, very important issue for Korean people. And as a Sherpa of the Nuclear Security Summit, just you introduced me, I have a great concern about not only nuclear weapons, but also nuclear terrorism as well. My mission as a Sherpa of the Nuclear Security Summit, I have to prepare for the very effective response to the nuclear terrorism as well. And as a country which is now facing the nuclear threat from North Korea, we have to prepare for the nuclear threat. But at the same time, from this nuclear threat, we have to also think about the possibility of nuclear terrorism as well. Therefore, next year in March, the Korea will host a nuclear security summit in terms of this nuclear terrorism. And also at the same time, recently we have another concern of the nuclear safety, which was developed by the natural disaster in Japan. Therefore, also we have to tackle this nuclear safety issue as well. This nuclear security and nuclear safety and nuclear non-proliferation has their own interconnectedness. Therefore, in this sense, we have to tackle these three items at the same time. Otherwise, we could lose sight of the seriousness of this nuclear issue. Therefore, this session, I understand that is the nuclear free is possible in this region, but we have to deal with this issue from the perspective of non-proliferation and also nuclear safety and also nuclear security. Those three elements are the foundation of the nuclear issue. Therefore, I hope this session we could expand our the discussion from non-proliferation to security and the safety as well. From the perspective of nuclear security, probably the non-proliferation issue can be discussed with, by other participants here in this session, but I'd like to focus my presentation on the nuclear security aspect. The Korea will host the Nuclear Security Summit next year, and we have almost 50 world leaders will participating in this nuclear security summit. Why nuclear security is important is that if any terrorist act happen in any place, in any time, then the consequences is huge. Not only nuclear bomb, but also the nuclear related, the conventional terrorists also very serious to us. Therefore, we are now talking with several measures for enhancing our security measure toward nuclear terrorists. And we are now expanding our scope from nuclear security to nuclear safety as well. From now on, we will study more about nuclear security's implication in the nuclear terrorism. When we see the nuclear power plant problem somewhere in this region, we thought that probably if the terrorists took use of this nuclear power plant as the way of terrorism, then we will have the same consequences from the nuclear bomb terrorists and also nuclear attack from North Korea and other areas. Therefore, we think this nuclear safety issue and nuclear security issue is same level of non-proliferation. And regarding to the non-proliferation, I think we have to discuss about two elements from the perspective of North Korea and from the perspective of relationship between China and North Korea. We have to examine both two elements, then we can have the broad picture about non-proliferation in this Northeast Asian region. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. General Pan.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for the forum to get me here or to participate in this very timely and stimulating discussion. I try to be very brief on this question thrown to me about the feasibility of creating Northeast Asia free of nuclear weapons. Now, first of all, I think that you can perhaps never overestimate the importance of this suggestion, the idea. Now, if Northeast Asia truly become a zone free of nuclear weapons, and then I think that we have not only solved the non-proliferation problems in this region, but also perhaps create a more favorable kind of situation in the region in which all the countries concerned could develop their more constructive and cooperative relations and for peace and stability. And I think that Northeast Asia, free of nuclear weapons, could provide also a good example to the world that how countries work together could solve these thorny problems. So I would argue that this is really perhaps the only way for the region to put our efforts of non-proliferation and nuclear disarmament on a more sustained kind of track. But of course, there are quite a number of obstacles. Some argue that perhaps it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to overcome. Now, first of all, of course, Northeast Asia, North Korea's nuclear programs. Now, you cannot imagine that Northeast Asia could become free of nuclear weapons with North Korea's nuclear programs unchecked and rolled back. And therefore, I think that this is really the first prerequisite for North Korea denuclearizing their problems, their programs. The second obstacle that we will have to overcome and how the United States adjusts its extended deterrence, nuclear extended deterrence to this region. Now, the extended deterrence, in fact, indicates the use of nuclear weapons to this region. Now, it's not only violating, perhaps, or the nuclear-free zone kind of demand, but perhaps also violating, if not the letter of the denuclearization agreement in the joint statement 2005. It does in spirit. Because denuclearization of the peninsula, in my perspective, should include no use of nuclear weapons on the peninsula. So how the United States would adapt to this region in order to have a nuclear-free zone in this region, I think that Washington will have to change its nuclear strategy. The third one is there seems kind of increasing arms competition among major powers in this region. Each envisage a role of nuclear weapons in their security strategy. So you see that if you look back in history, there has never been a kind of lack of interest on the part of the research community to explore the way to create a nuclear-free zone in this region. Big powers like the United States, like Russia, and even China does not show much interest in that. This kind of region or setup might restrict or limit the freedom of their action in their military buildup. And therefore, how to reduce this kind of arms competition? I'm not saying arms race, but anyway, each major power, in fact, is playing its role in that. And fourthly, I think this is also a major problem, how to ensure that the peaceful use of nuclear energy will not generate a kind of loopholes or to diverting the nuclear technology material for weapons purpose. Particularly since many countries in this region with still robust kind of programs for nuclear energy program, despite, I think, Japan's recent nuclear tragedy. Now, as I see that these are the major obstacles. But, of course, some of the issues involves kind of technological restrictions. But I think in most cases, our problem is more political rather than technical. And therefore, the bottom line is, if we really want to be serious to create such a zone free of nuclear weapons in Northeast Asia, we must address a deep-seated kind of mistrust among major players in this region. Only by enhancing mutual confidence and trust, and do not take state-to-state relations as a game of zero-sum nature, we don't have a hope to that end. I thank you very much.
Thank you, General Pan. Ambassador Abe.
Thank you. The moderator raised a number of issues, including issues of global nature. But since the question we have been given is a regional question, in East Asia, is nuclear-free East Asia possible? So let me focus on the regional aspects. If you look around this region, if you cannot make the countries who have nuclear weapons give them up, you cannot have a nuclear weapon-free East Asia. Is that right? Therefore, look around. There are Russia, China, North Korea who have nuclear weapons. But some may also say Americans also have the either strategy or in the past deployed the nuclear weapons in this region. So let's count the U.S. in. So we have to make 4 of them give up nuclear weapons to make East Asia weapon free, right? As far as U.S. and Russia are concerned, I think they are on the right track. And this is an opportune moment to push them, because the president of the strongest country in the world has now advocated weapon-free world. This is the best time to do so, because unless the strongest countries advocates giving up weapons, no one does, because the weaker ones are more afraid of the strong one. So this is the best time to do so, and let's encourage U.S. and Russia to continue their course, move on to the next stage of reduction of strategic nuclear weapons and other nuclear weapons, including tactical nuclear weapons. Tactical nuclear weapons, but in fact, tactical nuclear weapons are a strategic threat to China. It can be used for strategic purposes in East Asia. Strategic means only between U.S. and Russia in that sense, but otherwise they are also strategic importance. Then we have to think about China. China says their nuclear force is so small that unless U.S. and Russia come down far below, they should not be involved in the nuclear reductions. Well, I have some sympathy to that argument. But in order to encourage U.S. and Russia to move faster on their reductions, it's better to have China also engage in a collective nuclear reduction process as soon as possible. Today we see and hear a lot of concerns about the China modernizing, strengthening its nuclear and conventional forces with the benefit of its fast economic growth and now increased wealth to be given to the military. Yes, therefore, I do not want to see the situation where China surge once and then join the reduction exercise and come down. I think it's better to start, even though slowly, reducing from now on, rather than to surge first and come down. So in that sense, I wish to see that, well, China says their arsenal is small. If that is so, I wish to know how small it is, because we need to compare in order to start the collective exercise. And also, I wish to hear, well, when will they be ready to join the joint exercise? These are important factors, not only for the purpose of the collective reduction, but also for the purpose of transparency. Because without transparency, Russians, Americans will have concern, and they may hesitate to go down deeply into reductions. The last question is North Korea. How to make North Koreans to give up nuclear weapons? Unfortunately, looking back into past 20 years of history of negotiating, struggling with North Koreans, I think today it is not very optimistic that we can see them give up nuclear weapons anytime soon. But I think we can still hope that they will eventually realize having nuclear weapons do not give them any big advantage, big benefits, big rewards. Therefore, I hope one day they will realize it's a waste of resources to invest in nuclear weapons. And I hope that day should come sooner than later. And we can make our efforts to make that sooner. Last of all, we had Fukushima tragedy of reactor accidents. I would say two things. They are terribly concerned about radioactive fallouts in Japan, in Fukushima. Okay, that's terrible. But this may be a good opportunity to let the world know how terrible radioactive fallout is. But you have to think, This may be the kind of radiation that may have taken place in Hiroshima and Nagasaki with those relatively small bombs. Something that took place 10, 20 kilometers away from the epicenter. If that is so, imagine what would happen closer to the epicenter. 500 meters, 300 meters, just below epicenter. You'll be immediately evaporated. That's what happened. Do you want to have those kind of weapons? Do you want to use those weapons? I hope this would make people realize more seriously the risk of danger of nuclear weapons. And last of all, the Fukushima accident made people realize that this is a natural disaster caused accidents, but it can be also caused by terrorists, because it has shown to the world you don't have to bomb the reactor itself. You should just destroy the cooling water supply system, blow off the transmission tower. That's enough. So it told the terrorists, potential terrorists, easy way to destroy reactors and cause havoc. So I think Japan and other countries now have to work more seriously against any possible terrorist attack. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Abe and Professor Evans.
Well, is a nuclear-free East Asia possible? I'd love to think this region could lead the way to a nuclear-free world, but I think we have to agree with Nobu Abe that in the real world that's not going to happen, except in the context of a wider nuclear-free world as a whole. And the leadership to achieve such a world is clearly going to have to come from the United States and Russia, not least because between them they possess 22,000 of the 23,000 nuclear warheads that are presently out there in the world's arsenals. I think an ultimately nuclear weapons-free world is achievable, but it's going to be a long, slow, hard haul with a series of stages along the way. My commission, which was referred to, believed that it was possible to get to a stage of minimization of the number of nuclear weapons down to about 10% of the present global stockpile by 2025, but we were unwilling and unable to put a date for getting to zero after that because there are so many issues, technical issues of verification and enforcement which need to be resolved, as well as, of course, all the psychological issues about status, prestige, and all this curious comfort that states continue to have in the old Cold War verities about the utility of nuclear deterrence. An awful lot of mindsets are going to have to change, as well as a lot of technical conditions are going to have to be satisfied before we get to that stage. But don't let any of us succumb to complacency and think that this is really a bit of a non-problem, a Cold War problem, which is really behind us. Nobody's going to be stupid enough to do anything aggressive with nuclear weapons, and the risks are not very high about just jogging along as we are at the moment. The truth of the matter is the contrary. Given what we know about system vulnerability, human error, human frailty, and how many things went wrong during the very sophisticated command and control days of the US-Russia standoff during the Cold War, given all that we know, it is sheer dumb luck that we have not had a nuclear weapons catastrophe for the last 65 years. And it cannot be assumed that that luck will continue and that we'll go without a catastrophe caused, if not deliberately, by accident, misadventure, miscalculation. So we have to start moving down the road and taking these steps, not just the security, the safety, the non-proliferation steps that are all part of the total picture, but the steps toward actual disarmament. There are two big things that I think can be done in this respect, or two big frameworks within which we have to think. The first is about numbers themselves. And here, of course, the leadership in reducing those numbers is going to necessarily have to come from the US and Russia, because that's where the numbers are. And I think we can be very pleased with President Obama's leadership on this. But we can't be fantastically confident about the present atmospherics, given all the other issues that are now intruding in the way of the next round of serious negotiations. But we've got to keep global pressure on those two states to go down that path. But in this region itself, in Asia, there are some important things that have got to happen with respect to numbers. And in particular, it's critical that no state in this region actually increases the number of nuclear weapons. And that goes for India and Pakistan, further west, but it also goes for China. And I think, given that China has played such a responsible role for so many years in adopting a posture of minimum credible nuclear deterrent, no more than a couple of hundred weapons, we don't know because there is no transparency, as Norbu said, but it would be, I think, a tragedy if China, for whatever reason, either anxiety about comparative conventional weapon status with the US or issues of prestige or status or anything else, I think it would be a tragedy if China went in a really substantial way down the path of adding to its arsenal. Maybe a bit optimistic to think that it can move to reductions until we get substantial movement from US and Russia. But please, Xinjiang, I mean, the plea is to try and hold the line so that at least we're not making the situation worse. And that means, of course, China getting into, it means all the nuclear powers getting into serious strategic dialogues about what are credible minimum deterrent levels for each of them, and being prepared to be transparent and to get into the kind of understanding of these issues which will enable us to hold the line on where we are at the moment and move systematically forward. It's also critical, of course, to hold the line with North Korea, and through a strategy of containment and deterrence and keeping the door open for negotiation, hoping that things won't get worse there and ultimately will get better, and perhaps we can talk some more about that later. So that's what you can do on the numbers side. I think really focus on the issue of holding the line and moving forward towards ultimate reduction. There's one other issue we haven't talked about which I think is very important in this whole disarmament context, and that is getting some movement on the issue of doctrine, on our perceptions about what the role and utility of nuclear weapons actually are. Unless we can change mindsets and get a lot of defence people away from thinking old Cold War thoughts about the deterrent utility of these weapons, not only to act as a deterrent against nuclear attack from others, but also as an all-purpose defence asset to deal with non-nuclear threats. Unless we can move down the path of, at the very least, confining the perception of what nuclear weapons are about as being for the sole purpose, so long as they exist, of deterring others using nukes, then we're not going to make much progress on the larger objective of getting down to low numbers and ultimately zero. In this respect, I think the two US allies in this region, Japan and Korea, have a particularly important role to play, because there's been a long tradition of sheltering comfortably under the US nuclear umbrella, perfectly understandably in the context of wanting that US capacity to deal with the potential for a nuclear attack and to have that up there in deterrent lights. That's understandable. But what I think is less understandable and acceptable and helpful in the present age is continuing to rely on the US nuclear deterrent for general security purposes. It's a matter, I think, of we by all means keep the concept of extended deterrence, because if countries like Japan and Korea, and Australia for that matter, don't feel comfortable about the US willingness to back us with conventional support, then that will be very destabilising, sure, for the region and the present environment. But let's move away from the reliance on the extended nuclear deterrent. Let's get away from the perception that nukes are somehow an important part of the deterrence we need against other forms of weapons of mass destruction, biological, chemical, or that we need nuclear weapons to deal with the possibility of conventional assault. If you keep that mindset, you're really going to be stuck for a very, very long time with the reality of nuclear weapons. It's going to be very, very difficult to change. Japan actually last year, in a move that received practically no public attention at all, did move towards that position under the present government, saying to the United States in the context of its nuclear posture review that Japan would not object were America to adopt the position that the sole purpose of nuclear weapons was to deter against nuclear attack. In other words, that they were not to be regarded as available for non-nuclear threat contingencies. The ROK, unfortunately, didn't follow that lead. There was some willingness to do so, I think, in the Blue House, not much from the military. And, of course, America's NATO allies in Eastern and Central Europe also got very uptight about the notion of reducing the role or changing doctrine in that sense. And it didn't happen. But if Japan and Korea really want to play a leadership role in moving the world towards a saner and safer, ultimately nuclear-free environment, I think that's one of the most helpful things they could do, would be to come out publicly again and say, well, we sure as hell want to be able to rely on that conventional support from the US. We perfectly well understand that if we want a nuclear-free world, we've got to start reducing reliance on nuclear weapons for non-nuclear threat contingencies. So that would be my plea to Norbu and my Korean colleagues here to perhaps give us some indication of a willingness to move on that front. And of course my plea to my Chinese colleague Chen Chang is to can we move on the transparency front, and in particular on at least freezing and not making matters worse.
Thanks, Professor Evans. Professor Choi.
I don't know how much I can add after hearing the previous speaker's statement. But actually, I have some disagreement with some previous speakers. First of all, it seems to me that there are some differences among ourselves in terms of priority in handling the nuclear issues. For South Korea, maybe the nuclear deterrence is right now is the most important issue for us because of the North Korean nuclear challenge. Second, nuclear safety issue is going to be another important issue to be resolved and discussed among the countries in the region. But actually, I agree with Ambassador Abe said. Actually, prevention of incident or accident is quite critical. But what I like to add to is not only the prevention, but also the consequence management is the area we have to increase our cooperation in handling. Of course, nuclear accident can happen anytime by various causes. So after that, what we can do is kinds of a cooperation very necessary among all the concerned parties in the region as well as at a global level. So I think that's the second issue we have to deal with. Third, maybe the non-proliferation issue. And fourth, unfortunately, maybe nuclear security issue. Frankly speaking, I do not speak for the government, I speak for myself. Of course, if you ask the question, how much you are seriously concerned with nuclear security to South Koreans, I don't know what kinds of response you can get from the public. Because actually we have been living with North Korean nuclear challenge for the past 2 decades. So we are relatively preoccupied with North Korean challenges in terms of the military threat, not the nuclear terrorism threat. So actually there are some differences in understanding of these nuclear issues. But let me go back to nuclear deterrence issue. I fully agree with it. Actually, let me correct. Japan is a little bit reluctant in accepting the NPL last year, while South Korea fully accepted NPL. That's my understanding. Japanese officials, of course, this is my observation, have some reservation because actually they are pretty much concerned with the weakening of the U.S. nuclear deterrence. Actually, U.S. deterrence actually including nuclear umbrella issue. Between the United States and South Korea, we are having the Extended Deterrence Policy Commission right now. Of course, we fully understand the noble objective of the United States to achieve the nuclear-free world, the global zero. But unfortunately, because in achieving that nuclear-free world, it is necessary for us to have a denuclearization of North Korea first. That's the condition. But my hunch, the denuclearization process will take a long time. I don't know how much fast we can achieve that goal. Actually, lead us to accept nuclear-free world in a more easy way. And also, we are actually, United States trying to reduce the salience of nuclear weapons in extent deterrence. We fully understand. But unfortunately, I don't know what would be the North Korean response, North Korean understanding of nuclear weapons in the current modern warfare. So we have to take into account not only our concerns, but what would be North Korea's perception and understanding of nuclear weapons. If actually, it seems to me that North Korean nuclear weapons present various challenges for us. Crisis management, and actually peacetime issue, and third, maybe warfare. We will be facing totally different warfare if North Korea continue to develop and modernizing nuclear weapon capabilities. So, first priority, from my perspective, should be given to the enhancement of deterrence issues in various ways. Of course, I fully understand it is necessary for us to enhance our conventional deterrence capability, but unfortunately, the United States has failed to provide us a reliable conventional deterrence capability up to now. Maybe in the near future, it is possible for the United States to show us more credible and reliable deterrence posture vis-a-vis South Korea and also Japan. If that's the case, it is possible for us to go for nuclear zero or nuclear-free Northeast Asia very much. Of course, for example, Georgia Tech has been running the nuclear weapon-free zone for the past 1.5 decades. I hope we can apply that kind of model to South Korea. But as General Powell mentioned, there are tons of research done on that issue. But there's a precondition should be met before in accepting the nuclear-free region in Northeast Asia. So actually, the safety issue is another one. It seems to me that China is going to build 70 more nuclear reactors, and Japan 50. I think that South Korea is about 22. Japan is going to build more 12 nuclear reactors. So I think the safety issue is the one we have to seriously take into account in the next nuclear security summit. Actually, about just slightly over a year after the Fukushima incident, the Seoul Nuclear Security Summit will take place. So we cannot avoid the issue of nuclear safety issue. We have to deal with nuclear safety issue in a more extensive way. Otherwise, I think the second nuclear security summit, maybe, I don't know whether there will be third or fourth, but anyway, Seoul Nuclear Security Summit will be viewed negatively. So we have to agree on some kinds of principles or at least guidelines in enhancing the safety of nuclear power plant. That will be related to the issue of the next generation of nuclear energy issue, how we can promote the peaceful use of nuclear energy in a more productive way, in a safe way. So I think that's the issue we have to deal with. So I suggested some kinds of guidelines should be agreed on the next nuclear security summit. And also, in my paper, I presented that maybe North Korean nuclear issue should be included in that meeting. Of course, I don't know, Ambassador Kim knows more than I do about this, what's going on about the Shepard meeting. It seems to me that there's some reservation for some countries to include North Korean nuclear issue. But I think for us, actually, North Korean nuclear issue involves almost every dimension, every aspect of nuclear challenge we have. Security, safety, safeguard, non-proliferation, even in deterrence issues. So we should include, in one way or another, North Korean issue. Of course, we cannot spend much more time on North Korean nuclear issue. Of course, there are 9 items to be discussed among the, I don't know how many head of state will come to Seoul next year, maybe 50. It's almost impossible to have a consensus among themselves. If not, if that's the case, we should have a kind of separate meeting among the directly concerned parties to agree on how we can solve North Korean nuclear issue from nuclear security perspective, safety perspective, and non-proliferation perspective. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Choi. I'd like to ask General Pan if he thinks that we're actually talking about the same concept when we refer to nuclear deterrence in this conversation, because I've heard it used in many different ways today, and it seems to me that if we're not even talking the same language, we're going to have a real problem dealing with the negotiations to get down to a nuclear-free state ultimately, especially as we're now hearing that the agenda is crowded with a new set of dimensions to do with the fuel cycle and safety, which have not previously been considered directly related to the issue of nuclear weapons proliferation and disarmament, rather more indirect relationship. So I'd be interested in your insight on that.
Well, no, first of all, I think that we need to have some consensus on the definition of a nuclear-free zone in Northeast Asia. particularly in terms of scope.
Speaking to the mic.
My perspective is if any norms or on that matter tells us, and this should be a free zone, nuclear free zone, covering the Korean Peninsula and Japan. Of course, if you include Mongolia into Northeast Asia, Mongolia has already been a nuclear free zone country. And I think that the coverage should be these three countries with matching obligations of nuclear weapon states, including China, United States, Russia, and others, for the obligations they should undertake as far as the nuclear free zone is concerned. Of course, the progress for setting up such kind of free zone, nuclear free zone in Northeast Asia, cannot be easily achieved without the progress of nuclear disarmament among the nuclear weapon states. I think that's true. But you should not, I think, that you mix these two things together. I say the nuclear free zone will have to go hand in hand with the progress of nuclear disarmament. And then I think that you complicate the matters. And therefore, when we have other nuclear weapon free zones, of course, we also demand the progress of nuclear disarmament. But I don't see how you should attach the progress of nuclear disarmament as a precondition for that. To me, I think why I said this is a critical issue, because as I see it, if these three countries, particularly South Korea and Japan, both are member countries of NPT, these two countries have already undertaken the obligation, so not the possession, not and so on and so forth of this. So it should not be, in theory, to accept a kind of nuclear free zone covering these areas, in my definition. So I guess that the problems, in fact, comes from just Gary said about Japan and South Korea's attitude towards the value of nuclear deterrence, towards the value of the role of nuclear weapons. So if they do not change their mind, I think it's very difficult to reach some consensus on that. Now, Peter, you asked a question about nuclear deterrence. Now, in our perspective, we think that nuclear deterrence has never been a good idea. In the Cold War years, nuclear deterrence has been the source of nuclear arms race between the two nuclear superpowers. Ended up with huge nuclear arsenals on each side. Okay. Now, since the end of the Cold War, we don't see any, in fact, kind of positive value for nuclear deterrence. Now, Japan could argue they need nuclear deterrence because they fear, for example, the attack from North Korea, or they said, including China. But North Korea could also say that because they are faced with a kind of a nuclear threat from the United States, and therefore they must be prepared. So I guess that the nuclear deterrence today in this region continue to constitute the source of mistrust, of a kind of action vis-a-vis the reactions. And to be realistic, I think almost everybody knows that the nuclear weapons indeed cannot be used in this region. So I would argue that as soon as the nuclear deterrence could be changed, and then I think this region would be far better off. Now, on that score, I would argue that Japan seems to be particularly ambivalent towards nuclear weapons. On the one hand, Japan indeed has become the champion for nuclear disarmament, claiming they are the only victims of nuclear bombing. That's true. But on the other hand, we keep hearing some kind of very ambiguous activities within that country, very ambiguous kind of remarks on whether they should develop their own nuclear weapons. See? And therefore, I think that there's also a need, a kind of a strategic kind of transparency on the part of Japan. You see, what's really their attitude towards nuclear weapons? For China, I think that the first thing is China seems to be quite transparent in its strategic intention, and that is no force use. We hope, pending nuclear disarmament, that is the least the thing that nuclear weapons should do to show their responsibility towards the world. And I guess if the United States also change its attitude and adopt no force use, I think that would go a long way towards building trust among nuclear weapon states. Now, since China is the only nuclear weapon state today to declare no force use under any conditions, it loses its initiative because it could only use nuclear weapons after absorbing the nuclear attack by other countries. And since China wants to keep its nuclear arsenal as low as possible, it cannot to be transparent on the number, on the locations of these weapons, because that's the price we have to pay. You see, because we are so few in nuclear warheads. Now, my colleague said that China increases the number of nuclear weapons, nuclear warheads. I don't believe so. I have no number exactly. But if you look at the counting of SIPRI and the American scientists, nuclear scientists, their bulletin, I think they are counting of the number of nuclear warheads almost at the same level. I don't see any kind of dramatic increase of nuclear warheads while on the part of China, while United States and Russia decrease their nuclear posture. I think China has already been quite expressing that position. That is, when the two countries reduce the number of their nuclear warheads to a certain level, China is willing to participate in this kind of multilateral process. But what exact number that is, I think that could be negotiated. And China expressed its interest even today that you are willing to participate in this kind of consulting process. Mind you, that even in the Cold War years, in the late 1980s, China said that indeed it did participate in a kind of 5 nuclear powers, not really negotiation, but a kind of exchange of views on the possible steps to be taken for nuclear disarmament. So I don't think that China is really afraid of this. We're waiting for the progress. We are urging the United States and Russia to take further steps for DPCARds, and including ratification of CTBT. So I'm not so sure to say that China is reluctant to participate in this. But I think that the reality is the two nuclear weapon power arsenal account for almost 95% of the world total. How could you expect China to participate? And even if China does show the interest, I don't think the United States and Russia really welcome China's participation. So I guess that we are trying to push and wish to put nuclear disarmament on the stable track. But now, since today we are discussing about the nuclear-free zone in Northeast Asia, and I think that the more pertinent question to ask is, what is really the attitudes of the United States and its Western allies in this region towards this issue?
I'd like to change gears in a moment to another set of issues, but before I do, I want to go to Ambassador Abe and follow up this question that we've just been discussing about deterrence as it applies to the region and how that complicates the geopolitical relationships and makes negotiations on a number of issues very difficult. I've been very curious over the last decade to watch American nuclear weapons withdrawn from Korea. The last weapons left in February of 1992. Most of those weapons have actually been dismantled. They don't exist anymore. And I've heard recently about the discussions here in Seoul, some debates about redeploying American tactical nuclear weapons in Korea, which to me is very strange because other than a few gravity bombs that are in Europe, barely maintained at this point by the United States, there are no tactical nuclear weapons in the American arsenal to redeploy. So I've been a little bit wondering what people were thinking. And when I look at how a nuclear war would be fought in Korea with North Korea, I'm struck that North Korea's 2 tests have been 1 failure and 1 successful test, and its longer-range missiles have all failed. So if you're Kim Jong-il, you're not very confident, I would expect, that you can actually aim a weapon outside your own territory and have it explode. You're fairly confident with a lot of care and preparation. If you put it in a hole in the ground, it will blow up. But why would someone be so stupid as to go on top of that bit of ground when it's blown up? So, and then I think, well, the only way the United States could respond quickly, other than flying a bomber all the way from the United States with a weapon, being refueled, dropping it, flying it all the way back, not many weapons could be delivered that way, and it would be very slow. And we all know that a war on the DMZ would be very fast, is to use submarine-launched missiles from the mid-Pacific fired at a low angle. And I find it myself inconceivable that President Obama would fire those weapons without first consulting with Beijing and Moscow, and I find it further very difficult to believe that they would be in agreement that those weapons should be fired. So, and if they were, they would be huge. There would be 100 Fukushimas just north of the DMZ with debris, radioactive debris floating towards Seoul. It's madness. So it seems to me that in effect, nuclear deterrence now in Korea is really only existential. It's really way in the background in any military sense, practically speaking. Whereas in the bigger picture of great power relations, it's still very salient over other regional conflict issues. First of all, just the Sino-Japanese relationship, and also, of course, the issue of Taiwan from the American perspective is still very important. Yet, General Parnas suggested you could have an intermediate step where you have a zone, a nuclear weapon-free zone treaty, a standard NPT instrument. They exist in a number of places around the world, here just in Northeast Asia, and in a sense those bigger issues could flow around such a zone and still rely on whatever residual nuclear extended deterrence exists. So my question is, from a Japanese perspective, when you look at what the United States has actually done to its arsenal, how credible is this deterrent force, and is it really meaningful to rely on it?
Well, a couple of points. First of all, almost all those countries who have nuclear weapons today say they are for their deterrence. I'm not sure about China, but Russia, US, France, UK, India, Pakistan, they all say they are for deterrence. But once a Japanese Prime Minister said, we have to depend on American nuclear deterrence, but we don't really want to, but this is a necessary evil under the real international circumstances. So I think, honestly, the US, Japan, South Korea, they all want to one day give up nuclear deterrence. But under the circumstances, they are obliged to keep it as a last resort. NPR said it as a last resort. Have you ridden subway in Seoul? You go down, there are gas masks stored in the case there was any attack from the north with chemical weapons. That's a real situation, reality. You are threatened with a potential massive chemical attack. How do you stop them? Last resort is nuclear deterrence. If they ever did it, you may be retaliated with a nuclear retaliation. That, under the current circumstances, you're obliged to keep it. I think that's the situation today. We indeed try hard to reduce it as much as possible. But it's very difficult to quantify. You cannot say we are 80% free of deterrence or so. So that's what we are doing. And from that point of view, the North Korean acquisition of nuclear device is very damaging. Well, you said technically it was failure or half failure. True. But it's very psychological. People in Korea, Japan, feel today threatened with North Korean nuclear weapons. And honestly, North Korean broadcasting from time to time say we'll put Seoul in a fireball. We make Tokyo in a fireball. People laugh at it. They are making stupid jokes again. But for some people, it's a real threat. Therefore, they have to make sure that they never make any mistake calculation on the north side. And that's why the deterrence has to be kept as a last resort. For a brief period of time in Japan and also in Korea, there were some very small number of people who argued they want to bring American nuclear forces back to Korea or Japan. But they're very short-lived, and they didn't have much of a realistic military consideration, but very psychological arguments. Fortunately, they died down very quickly.
Ambassador,
maybe I just don't get it, but can I?
Sure, briefly, because we've got a couple of minutes left.
Why do we make the assumption that you do need nuclear weapons as a deterrent against either the misuse of a North Korean nuclear device or, for that matter, chemical or biological? Isn't the absolute certainty of massive conventional retaliation with all the gigantic destruction that the US with its allies could wreak upon North Korea, isn't that in the real world a far more realistic deterrent than the will-o'-the-wisp of a nuclear thing which, for all the reasons that Peter Hayes said, we know is not going to be used? Because even if North Korea were to use a nuclear weapon, the US is not going to be barbaric enough or stupid enough in the eyes of world opinion to do the same, particularly when it has a conventional capability to do anything that would be conceivably necessary. You're talking the realm of psychology here, maybe, but you're not talking the realm of reality in terms of real-world deterrent calculation.
Right or reply?
Briefly.
I've spoken to some American military people. Some of them told me today, with American conventional superiority, they can eventually prevail, even if North Korea attacks. Okay, eventually. So, first stage, there may be onslaught of North Korean forces with conventional chemical munitions. Seoul will be devastated. Hundreds of thousands maybe have become casualty. Then eventually, Americans come and push them backward. Is that a good situation? It would be better to deter them with the nuclear retaliation, possible retaliation in the first place. Let's not take place. That's a lot better option. That's why we have to do it.
I feel like I'm Larry King Live all of a sudden. But okay, yes, two fingers, and then I'm going to give the final word to Ambassador Kim for a very important agenda.
Well, now Peter, in fact, mentioned that our first meeting in Hiroshima, 1995, at the Pagwasha annual conference. At that conference, I was deeply impressed by an argument by our Japanese friends. And that is, they criticize, in fact, accuse the U.S. use of a bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki at a time when Japan was just about to acknowledge defeat and surrender. and therefore they argued that these two bombs, in fact, are just wrongly used. So no matter what Japan did, the United States use of nuclear weapons in order to save the lives of their GIs, because to use nuclear bombs could facilitate, to shorten, the war, to save the lives of United States soldiers. But this is not really a legitimate kind of excuse, because nuclear weapons, remember, in their argument, and I agree, are the inhumane weapons, and they should never be used on any account. So that's their argument. Now, we hear another kind of version of a Japanese view, and that is, if the nuclear weapons are used not really on Japan, but on other countries, they could accept. So I guess this is kind of, you see, the tension in their position. And that's why I think that Japan really need to tell the world what really they are up to. They really want nuclear disarmament, or they really want a kind of a nuclear deterrence, not objecting the use of nuclear weapons against any other countries, for whatever reasons. Thank you.
Of course, that particular event was very complicated because, leaving aside why the United States dropped those weapons, of course they were dropped on roughly 50,000 Koreans who also died, many of whom died there and many of whom came back to die later in North and South Korea. But I did want to give the last word to Ambassador Kim to address a couple of issues that I want to ask him about related to the summit. The first is, will there be a very clear response to the issue of the spent fuel being inside the reactor, whether it's a pressurized water reactor or a boiling water reactor or any kind of reactor, because it seems one of the main lessons.
안녕하십니까. 저는 한국교육과학기술부에 근무를 하고 있는 이주원 사무관이고요. 지금 문식 교수님께서 설명하신 캠퍼스 아시아 사업을 담당하고 있습니다. 갑자기 부탁을 하셔서 당장 드릴 말씀은 없는데, 저는 오히려 한 가지 좀 오늘 패널로 여러 전문가분들이 나오셨으니까 한 가지 여쭤보고 싶은 게 있는데, 아까 시에타오 교수님께서 대학이 특히 사회과학 분야에서 공동 협력 연구를 증진을 해야 된다고 말씀을 하셨고, 그 말씀을 하시면서 이제 그런 공동 협력을 할 때 특히나 언어적인 어려움이 굉장히 크다라는 말씀을 하셨습니다. 저도 캠퍼스 아시아 프로그램을 기획을 하면서 언어적인 어려움이 가장 크다는 데 공감을 하고요. 대안의 하나로 이제 서부 대학의 그런 어떤 교수 요원을 영어가 가능한 교수진을 유치하는 부분도 말씀해 주셨는데, 혹시 그 부분 외에도 어떤 다른 대안을 갖고 계시거나 생각하시는 부분이 있으시다면 좀 언어적인 어려움을 극복할 수 있는 방법이 어떤 것이 있을지 좀 질문을 드리고 싶습니다.
Especially imposed by the NPT and also the Security Council resolution. Many Security Council resolutions imposed sanctions against North Korea. Therefore, North Korea should comply with the international obligations. Based on this condition, the North Korean leader could be invited to the Security Summit next year. And we will welcome the North Korean leader if he could visit the Republic of Korea on the occasion of Nuclear Security Summit next year. We have several concerns about North Korea in terms of Nuclear Security Summit. My president also, he has a very serious concern about North Korean the nuclear issue in terms of Nuclear Security Summit. First of all, as you pointed out, the North Korea, they try to build the light water nuclear reactor, and we have a very serious concern about the safety of the reactor being built by North Korea. Therefore, we have to talk with North Korea about the safety of the nuclear reactor. Therefore, the North Korean issue should be a part of the Nuclear Security Summit. Either way, therefore, my president, the invitation to North Korean leader Kim Jong-il is a serious one. Therefore, I hope North Korean leader could accept that invitation, and he could participate in the Nuclear Security Summit and talking together
thank you for
nuclear
your
security and nuclear safety.
But information,
the nuclear program of North Korea is not a part of this nuclear security subject. But anyhow, if he visit and he talks with other world leaders about nuclear safety and
I can
nuclear
remember
security,
that who
and naturally the nuclear proliferation issue also will come up, and then we can also make some progress on this nuclear proliferation issue.
Then we develop.
Regarding to the spent fuel, just you mentioned
that's a very much primitive. But nowadays,
with regard to
the online systems become very better. So why we can think of
fuel is very
like that cyber systems
and serious
cyber universe systems
to
can
people
overcome that time lag between the regional
depending
for so we can think
energy
of
source.
Of course, the language is a problem, but anyway,
it's not dealing with this nuclear power plant issue, because
I hope it's become
this
better
nuclear security
in the future.
Is dealing with the highly enriched uranium, HEU. But nuclear power plant does not use HEU. The nuclear power plant uses only 4% enriched uranium. Therefore, this is not HEU. Therefore, this HEU is the main and core issue of the nuclear security. But after the nuclear power plant problem in Japan, the world leaders, they expressed their concern about this, the nuclear power plant, the fuel. Even though it is a low enriched uranium, this also should be discussed in the Nuclear Security Summit. Therefore, as you pointed out, this is becoming a very important issue in the Nuclear Security Summit. Therefore, we have to address how we can protect this spent fuel. When any terrorist, they try to disconnect the electricity supply to nuclear power plant, then the consequences will be the same as the nuclear bomb. Therefore, we have to address this issue as seriously as the nuclear bomb issue. Therefore, the spent fuel issue can be discussed in the Nuclear Security Summit next year. Just one point for the deterrence. Just the Gareth and Mr. Abe and Pan discussed about the deterrence issue. I think this deterrence issue is like a proliferation issue. The nuclear issue is related to the proliferation, and the bomb can be easily proliferated. Then the deterrence also can be proliferated. If there is no proliferation of nuclear weapons, then probably there will be no deterrence of the nuclear weapons. Therefore, we have to deal with this deterrence issue in terms of proliferation of nuclear weapons. In the Korean Peninsula, I think we need a deterrence strategy, because we are talking about the proliferation of North Korea in terms of nuclear weapons. Therefore, this deterrence issue naturally followed. Therefore, we have to think about this deterrence, the utility of deterrence in terms of non-proliferation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kim. We have about 45 seconds left, and I have a final question for you. It's, I think, 66 years since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I want you to think 66 years out. which I guess would put us in 2070 roughly. I can't do the math in my head. I have a question for you, and the answer, please, is yes or no. Is Northeast Asia, East Asia, whatever you want to call it, going to be nuclear free? Start with Dr. Choi.
Yes. I expect by that time, I think we will be able to see the nuclear free Northeast Asia with a change and starting from
one word.
Okay.
Ambassador Kim.
I hope yes.
Ambassador, that was interesting. Ambassador Abe.
Yes, because there will be better weapons that time.
Okay.
Yes, because I'm a congenital naive optimist.
General Khan.
Yes, I think the world now is getting consensus that nuclear weapons should really have no value for the security of the world.
Well, I think we got a sense from this discussion of just how complex these issues are, but we also get a sense that things are changing, some for the bad, some probably more for the good in this particular global problem in this region. So I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank our listeners for being so patient and interested, and we look forward to working together to make this happen over the coming years. So thank you very much. Kamsahamnida. Thank you.
Problem, but I found out there is also a strong room for our ministry.